We've been going through a series over the last few weeks of when God is silent. And a lot of us have come through a season in our own life, or maybe you're still in that season, where God is not responsive to your prayers. He's not responding to your pleas. He's not changing your circumstances. And as a result, that you're really struggling in your faith. And you know, a lot of times we end up in that place when God is silent. And so today what I want to do is look at when God finally breaks the silence and what we can learn from that experience. And he does that with Job in the book of Job. And everybody knows the story of Job, but I think that we don't really understand sometimes what's going on in the book. When I look at it, there's just a whole lot of curious things in the book that I just don't think that we need to just jump on board and think that somehow God was duped by Satan. I don't think that that's what's going on in the book. I don't think that God was tricked by Satan in order to allow all these problems to come into Job's life. That I think that what God is doing is that I think that really Job in many respects is almost like a drama. And if you begin to read it as a drama, a narrative there that is going on, that helps you to understand a little bit more of this dialogue between Job and his friends and this whole struggle that we have with the human condition. You stop and think about foster kids. You stop and think about kids that are exploited through human trafficking. And Opal, who's a part of our congregation here, does a great work in reaching out. You think about kids who are survivors who are orphans whose parents have died from AIDS, and all over the world, and not just in that part of the world, but all over the world and in our own communities, we are met with ugly things about the human condition that really just we have a hard time fitting those pieces into our puzzle about a good and loving God. But there are times when God breaks his silence and he comes through in a very dramatic way and he explains what's going on in that, or at least he gives us a little indication of what's going on. And in the book of Job, chapter 38, verses 1 through 3, we read this. Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, "Who is it that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words?" Hey, the last thing that I want to be is called out by God. You know, seriously. You know, there's a lot of people that can call me out. My wife has called me out on occasion. Some of you have called me out on occasion. My kids will even dare to call me out on occasion. But there's one person I don't want calling me out, and that's God. You know, because you know whenever he calls you out, that there's just no arguing with him. He says, "Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them." And so there he is in Job in the early or at the end of the book there, he's called out by God. And God finally speaks. Protest is a natural response to God's silence. And I want to say that one more time. Protest is a natural response to God's silence. When God isn't answering your prayers, when your sick baby isn't made well, when you've had a financial reversal that keeps on reversing, is that when you have an expectation of somehow that you're going to be healed from your disease, or maybe your marriage is going to come back together, or your kids are going to get off drugs, and it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Well, protest is a natural response to God's silence. But I'm telling you right now, you cannot afford to get stuck in protest. Because if you get stuck in protest, that serves you no good. All you're going to end up being is a bitter person, an angry person, in that you're going to be robbed of all the joy in your life. Somehow we have to get past the protest to the place where we can finally hear what God is saying to us in the midst of his silence and our suffering. Progress is only made when protest humbly yields to deeper spiritual realities. So to hear God after the silence in your life, here are some things that I'd like to pass along to you that we can learn from the book of Job. And the first thing that we can learn is that we need to remember who God is. We need to remember who God is. He is always loving, even when you don't feel it. He's always loving, even when you don't feel it. Think about this for a moment. The God who answers Job from the whirlwind is the same God who gave us Jesus Christ. Now, I know a lot of people get all confused about the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament, and I'm saying he's the same God, friends. You know, the problem isn't with God, the problem is with your understanding. And so oftentimes we feel that, well, the conclusions that I've drawn about God are correct, and therefore they don't need modification, that God is a meanie, or that God is insensitive, or God is unresponsive, or whatever else. But here's the answer to Job's suffering. The same God who answers Job from the whirlwind is the same God who gave us Jesus. The exact same God. Just what type of God do you think he is, by the way? You know, I mean, let's stop and think about it. The God of reality will allow kids to grow up in abusive families. Now, I don't like that any more than you do, but that's a fact. Is that the God of reality, maybe some of you grew up in an abusive home, and that an alcoholic parent or a neglectful parent. Well, the God of reality will allow that to happen. I don't like that. The God of reality will allow children's parents to die from AIDS. That's the God of reality. The God of reality will allow children to be raped. Now, I don't like that any more than you do, but that's part of this human condition that we live in. It's part of this evil world. The God of reality will allow people to starve. That's what happens. You know, you see, I discovered early on my own Christian faith, because I've had a lot of these questions about God, but I've discovered early on in my own Christian faith is that my basic protest is that God has not made earth heaven. That's my basic protest. That there's inequality with the races, there's inequality with gender, there's inequality as far as the distribution of the blessings. You know, you stop and think about it, is that I was born in America. Now, what did I do to deserve that? You know, seriously, what did I do I was born in America in the 50s. Is that at the rise of our economic prosperity in our country and in great years ahead, I was born during that season. What did I do to deserve that? There's a whole lot of people. Well, I was born in America. There are other people on the other side of the world in Cambodia that were born in Cambodia and that lived through the Pol Pot regime. What did they do to deserve that, friends? See, the God of this is chaotic, it's messy, it's ugly. I don't understand all of the nuances of human suffering. But I have answered the question in my own heart and to the satisfaction for myself of what type of God he is. He is the exact same God who gave us Jesus. And that settles the question for me. I don't have all the pieces of the puzzle put together. He's always loving even when I don't feel it, and he's always wise even when I don't get it. Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, "Who is it that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words?" He says, who is it that, you know, and I think that probably each one of us here are guilty of the same fault, is that we've questioned God's wisdom with ignorant words. We don't have the big picture. He does. He knows what he's doing. And he says, your critique of me is really, you don't understand. It's just like my kids oftentimes, certainly not now because they're all adults and they know better, right? But when they're little, is that, and I make decisions that either I don't have the time or the luxury of time to explain to them, or is that even if I explain to them, they never get it anyway. And so, but I'm the dad, and that's why, right? So I have to make some decisions you're not going to understand, you're not going to agree with, you're not even going to respect. But a good dad always makes those decisions in the best interest of his children. Now, I cannot explain all the particular instances of human suffering in the world. I cannot explain that. I don't even attempt to try any longer. But I do know this, is that God knows what he's doing. Now, it doesn't always seem like that to me. It didn't seem like that to Job. As a matter of fact, God comes to Job and he says, brace yourself like a man because I have some questions for you, buddy. And you must answer them. And what he did, actually what God did is he dumbed it down for Job. He says, okay, how about this one? And how about that one? And what about this? And what about that? He says, these are all things that are just, I don't even have to lift my pinky finger to understand or work through. And he says, you can't even figure out this much about my plan. And so We read in the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, this: "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts are just not your thoughts." So what type of God do you think he is? Seriously. Is he a God who knows what he's doing? Is he a God who understands? Is he a God who has insight beyond yours? Sure, you're left with your questions, and one of the things that God does not do, and trust me because I've had plenty of questions, he does not answer all your questions. He just does not do that. And so at the end of the day, the only thing that you're going to get from God is just simply this, is that, do you trust in my character? And if you don't, we part company. But if you do, I'll show you the path of how I can redeem your suffering. I'll show you the path of greater glory ahead for you. I'll show you things that you haven't even begun to dream of. And so at the end of the day, you have to answer the question, what type of God do you think he is? Just what type of God do you think he is? See, he's always loving when you don't feel it. He's always wise when you don't get it. And he's always just, even when you don't see it. In the book of Job, there again, is that God comes to Job, and as they're going through this dialogue here at the end of the book, is that God is cross-examining Job. He says, "You wanted to have an audience with me? Okay, you got your audience now." He says, "Here's a few questions that I have for you." And so he starts cross-examining Job. And then as he goes on, he said, "Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? What did I do to deserve this?" You know, here's the answer to that question, is that what did you do to deserve any one of the blessings that God has given you? I mean, seriously. You know, the last time I read my Bible, and I might be wrong about this, but the last time that I read my Bible, you know what I deserve from God? You know, if you really want to get into that debate with God, you know what you deserve from God? You deserve his judgment and condemnation. That's what you deserve from God. You know, you say, well, you know, as long as my good outweighs my bad. Well, yeah, I got news for you. As long as you got bad, your good doesn't matter. Think about it this way. I've used this illustration before, but it may be helpful for you. Is that on the way to my house, there are two streets. One has a stop sign, one doesn't. I was driving home one night with my daughter in the back and my wife in the front next to me. By the way, you know, you're just doubly condemned when you got two women in the car with you. And I took the turn to our house, and I hear from the back seat, "Nice stop, Dad." Well, I realized at that moment is that I was on the street with the stop sign, not the street without the stop sign. And so normally I go home without the stop sign because I'm so impatient. I don't like to stop, in particular since there's hardly any traffic on our street anyway. And so I just zoom around the corner and I head on home. But this particular time I zoomed around the corner and I blew the stop sign. And so I went down about 100 yards down the road and I stopped in the middle of the street. And my wife says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm making up for the stop sign that I just ran." And you know, just get going. You're still, you know. And I said, okay. Now, you know, we all can see how silly that is that you cannot make up for any of the wrong that you've done. Now, even if I came to the next stop sign and I stopped twice at it, it wouldn't make up for the stop sign that I ran. As a matter of fact, if a cop was there on that corner the night that I ran that stop sign and he pulled me over and I said, wait a minute, officer, you don't understand. Do you realize how many stop signs I've stopped in my life? I mean, seriously. You know, I mean, let's think about this, officer, for a moment. Let's just be logical. As long as my good, the number of times I have stopped, outweighs my bad, this is just one time I blew the stop sign. Well, maybe not one, but you know, this is one time that I blew the stop sign. As long as my good outweighed my bad, then what business it is of yours, officer? You know, to expect for me to attend to this minor detail. There was no traffic. What harm did it cause anyway? You know what he'd say? Tell it to the judge. So after he takes me to jail. So that's, we have this nonsensical idea that somehow that we deserve better from God. The fact of the matter is what I deserve from God is condemnation. I don't deserve health from God. I don't deserve a happy family. I don't deserve a happy marriage. I don't deserve a job. I don't deserve income. I don't deserve old age or living until old age. I don't deserve any of that. But God in His grace has given me more blessings than I can count. And I kind of think that the same is true for you. The problem is that we focus on all that God doesn't give us, and we protest because He hasn't made earth heaven. Would you discredit my justice? Who are you? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? We read in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, verses 6 through 8, it says, "Yes, Lord God Almighty, true and just are your judgments." Whenever God rules, He always rules correctly. And whatever God allows in your life, by the way, I'm going to say this right now, I'm going on record, is that the suffering that I went through to get me here was worth it. Amen. Now, I haven't seen how all this is going to play out, but the suffering that I went through to get me to this place in my life was worth it. And so, we're talking about how you can hear God after the silence. And the second thing, in order to hear God after the silence, is to recognize your limitations. Recognize your limitations. And you just simply need to know when to stop. You need to know when you're out of your element. You need to know when you're in over your head. And when you start critiquing God and His work in the universe, friends, you're in over your head. You're out of your element. You don't know what you're doing. Job finally comes to this realization later on in the book after God brings a few questions to Job, and then Job replied to the Lord and he said, I am nothing, God. Wait a minute. I am nothing. How could I ever find answers? I don't know the answers to these questions. Okay, you win. And God, by the way, wasn't done with him. But he says, how do I know these answers? He says, I'm going to cover my mouth with my hand. That's what I'm going to do because I've spoken too much already. And he says, I have nothing more to say. I'm done, God, that you win. Now, you have to see when you read the book of Job, and this is way, way back when I first became a Christian, I was really struggling with the whole issue of the problem of evil and the human condition and all of that stuff. And I had a bunch of questions for God, and I still do, but I was struggling with all of that stuff. And I read the book of Job because people said, this is all about, this problem of evil type of thing. And so I read the book, and at the end I was horribly disappointed because it seemed to me that God was just a big bully, is that He's throwing His weight around, I'm God, and who do you think you are type of thing. Well, there is, and by the way, that says more about what's going on inside of me than it does about what God is really about. What He's doing there is that He's helping Job to understand the proper order of creation. Is that, yes, Job, I am God. I don't need you to critique me. I don't need you to question me. I don't need you to doubt my justice or to doubt my love. I'm God, and I know what I'm doing. And it just comes a point, and you see, I went to deal the other night at the Department of Mental Health, and all the folks from the mental health community here in Riverside, they had this big conference, and so I was there and listening to them talk, and we had these roundtable discussions and talking about faith and the mental health community. And so, I was interested in how I can interface with that dimension of our community's lives too. And in these roundtable discussions, they asked us, well, what do you think mental health is? Or what is mental illness? Both sides of the coin. And I just kept coming back to the thing that it is that it's beliefs that are in accord with reality. You know, whenever I'm operating, Woody Allen said this. I love this quote. Woody Allen says that reality sucks, but it's the only place you can get a good steak. You know, you know. I mean, you know, is that there's a lot about reality we don't like, but it's, you know, there's certain things about it that we really do enjoy, right? And that's really the benefits, is that when you're dealing with reality, you begin to understand the world a whole lot better. You begin to understand yourself better, and you're not thrown into these places that you end up chasing fantasies. And that's exactly what God is doing with Job here. He says, let's just have a reality check. I'm God. I'm God. Remember, Job? And you're a human being. And so you're just going to have to accept reality, that there's certain things beyond your understanding. And so you need to recognize your limitations. Is that you need to know when to stop, but you also need to know when to turn around. You see, that's when we get in trouble. Is that when we get in trouble is when we start down the wrong road and we figure if we just run faster, we're going to reach our destination. And that's how we spend a lot of our lives, right? Is that we go down the wrong road of alcohol abuse. We go down the wrong road of indulging our sin. We go down the wrong road of drug abuse. We go down the wrong road of affairs. We go down the wrong road of cheating. We go down the wrong road of compromising our integrity. And we figure if I just run faster down that road, I'm going to reach my destination. The fact of the matter is that you're just going to get more and more lost. There comes a time in your life when you need to turn around. Turn around. And that's what Job does, that we see in Job 42 at the end of the book. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything. Okay. And by the way, do you believe that God can do anything? Yes. Yeah, now watch it when you say that. You know, because God can bring good from your suffering. God can bring you blessings that you know, we want to be able to be, we want to be rich, we want to be thin. We want to be good looking, right, our whole lives, even when we get old and wrinkled up, you know, and get one of these faces. You know, we could get the Joan Rivers look, you know. Hey guys, have I had any work done? You know. You've heard me say before that my uncle had plastic surgery. He really did. He had a facelift. And he says, feel this, Helen. That was my mom saying, feel this, Helen. He says, now I have to shave behind my ears. There are some limitations to being a man, you know. It's but he says, I know that you can do anything. God can bring good. Think about this. You know, Job is really, many people believe that Job is the oldest book in the Bible. And they don't know exactly when he lived, but they believe that he even lived before the days of Abraham. Now think about this for a moment. Is that thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, Job had no idea that thousands and thousands and thousands of years in the future, people would be blessed by his story. God was accomplishing some good purpose in through Job's suffering. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything and no one can stop you. You asked, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? It is I. You know, you got me dead to rights, God, guilty as charged. And I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. He says, I was out of my element, Lord. I was in over my head. And that's where we spend most of our time. All of your resentments are towards God, by the way. And if you start to peel back your resentments, they ultimately get to resentments towards God. Why didn't you let this person like me the way that they should have liked me? Why didn't you allow this to happen? Is that they are ultimately all resentments towards God. Even when they're resentments towards people, you feel that you've been ripped off by a person, but ultimately, if you connect the dots, that God let that happen to you. And so it's easy to be resentful towards God. He says, I was talking about things I didn't know, things far too wonderful for me. He said, listen and I will speak, and I have some questions for you and you must answer them. He says, I've only heard about you before, but now I've seen you with my own eyes. I take back everything I said, and I sit in dust and ashes to show my repentance. I need to turn around, God. Maybe today you need to turn around. You've been going down a path that serves you no good, going down a path of resentment, going down a path of bitterness, going down a path of unforgiveness, going down a path of doubting and questioning God. And maybe today is your day to sit in dust and ashes and say, you know, that I take back everything I've said. I'm just in over my head, and at the end of the day, I'm going to trust you. Finally, if we're truly going to hear God after the silence, here's what we need to do, is that we need to realize God's intentions. God will vindicate your righteousness. If you hang on to your integrity, even through the divorce, if you hang on to your integrity, even when your kids turn to dope, if you hang on to your integrity, even when you lose your job, if you hang on to your integrity, God will vindicate you. Not all at once, but he will. After the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz, the Temanite, I'm angry with you and your two friends. Now those were Job's counselors. By the way, you know who Job's counselors were? You know who Job's friends were? They were religious people who thought they knew better. You think about it for a moment. Some of the most dangerous people out there are religious people who think they know better. And so it says, I'm angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken accurately about me as my servant Job has. Now, isn't that interesting? Job didn't have all of the things figured out, but he was closer to the solution than they were. Job's religious friends who thought they knew better. And so take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer a burnt offering for yourself. My servant Job will pray for you. Now, isn't that interesting? Because all throughout the book of Job, that his friends are coming along and saying, you know, just give it up and confess that you've sinned against God, and then everything's going to fall in place. And now at the end of the book, what God says is that you guys are the guys with the problem, and I'm going to ask Job to pray for you. And I will accept his prayer on your behalf. I will not treat you as you deserve, for you have not spoken accurately about me as my servant Job has. Then Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite, something like that. Naamathite. If I slow down, I probably can get it right. Did as the Lord commanded them, and the Lord accepted what? And Job was vindicated, you see. As all of his friends were giving him counsel that was off topic, these religious people who thought they knew better, and at the end of the day, Job had to pray for them. By the way, isn't that wonderful that Job prayed for his friends that missed the mark? And that's what we should do for all of our friends who missed the mark, is that we should pray for them and pray that God's blessings will be upon them. Vindicate means just simply to clear someone of blame or suspicion, show or prove to be right, reasonable, or justified. God will not only vindicate your righteousness, but he will also bless your faithfulness through the struggle, through the sorrow, through the difficulty, through your suffering. When Job prayed for his friends, the Lord restored what? Job's fortunes. Now, people think, we have this kind of knee-jerk reaction to the book of Job and Job's story and so on and so forth. You have to understand what's going on here for a moment. This is progressive revelation. Do you know what that means? Is that progressive revelation is that you know more of the story than Job did. See, let's stop and think about it for a moment. What if Job lived before Abraham? He doesn't even know about the covenant that God had made with Abraham. What if Job lived before Moses and he doesn't know anything about the law of Moses and he doesn't know any, what if he lived before all of the prophets? He doesn't know anything about the predictions of a Messiah. He doesn't know anything about that. What if Job lived before the coming of Christ? Well, certainly he did. He doesn't know about Jesus. He doesn't know about redemption. He doesn't know about heaven. He doesn't know about God working through all of our suffering. He didn't have Romans 8:38 to read and to comfort him. And so what did blessings look like in Job's generation? Well, blessings look like material prosperity. And so what God is communicating, he says that you will go through suffering, but I'm going to bring you to blessing. Don't be such a literalist on all of this stuff and think, well, Job certainly would want his children back. Well, certainly he would. But understand what's going on is that he went through abundance, then he went through the valley in the shadow of death, and God brings him back to a greater abundance. Watch the theme. And so he has something. He loses everything, and he gets more through the process. That's what's really going on in the book of Job. And so understand the theme and don't get lost in all the details on all of this stuff. God will bless your faithfulness. That's the message of the book of Job. He will bless your faithfulness. Your partner may have been unfaithful. He will bless your faithfulness. Is that you may have lost your health. He will bless your faithfulness. You may have lost your job. He will bless your faithfulness. Hang in there. Don't quit. You know the story is of who's the guy? Winston Churchill. He says, when you're going through hell, don't stop. You know? And just so don't stop when you're going through hell. Finally, God will comfort your loss. Then all his brothers and sisters and former friends came and feasted with him in his home. And you notice what they did? They consoled him and comforted him because all of the trials that the Lord had brought against him. And each of them brought him a gift of money and a gold ring. Job was comforted through his loss. And so let God speak. Let God speak and remind you of a bigger reality than your sufferings. And you'll be blessed as a result. Let's pray.